So fellas, we've just had the best card of 2025 with UFC 317, and these are some of the fights to make after UFC 317. If you want to go to any specific points of the card, I've got the prelims and the main card fights on screen, but we'll start off with the first prelim fight. Jonathan Denise beats Alvin Hines on short notice. Doesn't really do it in super impressive fashion. Probably should have got him out of there, but I think for Denise, a fight that makes perfect sense is Mick Parkin, Mr. Slick Mick Parkin himself. Yeah, he's just beat Alvin Hines. He's coming off a win. He's only lost in the UFCs to Marcin Tybura, just like Mick Parkin. Both of these guys in a very similar position. 4 wins in the UFC, only lost to Marcin Tybura, beating everybody else. Mick Parkin's coming off a loss. Denise is coming off a win. Mick Parkin's ranked. Denise isn't, so I think this fight makes sense to get Denise in the rankings. I actually think it'll be quite a competitive fight. I know Denise is known for his pretty decent kickboxing, but like I said, there was times in that fight where Hines was making it look competitive, and I feel like for Mick Parkin, he arguably beat Marcin Tybura, didn't get dominated just like Denise, and I think he's pretty slick on the feet, and I'm not even just saying that because of his nickname, but I think Mick Parkin's actually a pretty solid guy on the feet. The only problem is he's got zero athleticism, so Mick Parkin, Denise, get the fight done. 2 fat heavyweights battling out to see who can break into the top 15. I like the fight. And then for Jacoby Smith, now I've been hyping this dude up, saying he's the best prospect in the welterweight division, and he just submitted Nico Price like it's nothing. I think for Jacoby Smith, a fight that makes sense could be Charles Radke. I like the fight with Charles Radke. Charles Radke's just been knocked out by Mike Mallet. He's coming off a brutal loss. And if you look at their career so far, it's a step up for Jacoby Smith. He's on a 2-fight winning streak with 2 finishes. Charles Radke's been a bit of a win-loss fighter. He's been finished by Carlos Prates and finished by Mike Mallet. He's had a couple of good finishes himself. I like this fight. It's a step up for Jacoby Smith. It's a step up in competition. We're not giving him 58-year-old Nico Price. We're giving him somebody around his age who actually has decent pop in his shots. But it's also a test for Jacoby Smith. This ain't just an easy fight. This ain't a can. This is where we're going to really find out about Jacoby Smith. Because I will say, even though he dominated that fight against Nico Price, his gas tank was a question. And again, we're still yet to see him against the proper opponent yet. So I feel like Charles Radke is the perfect fight. If Jacoby Smith can join Mike Mallet and Carlos Prates in the crew that, you know, in the guys that are able to finish Charles Radke, that's going to be big for Jacoby Smith. And it proves to me, well, it proves to us that he's, you know, has some potential in the welterweight division. If Charles Radke can beat Jacoby Smith, massive win. Throw checks Jacoby Smith. I feel like it's the perfect fight to build Jacoby Smith. Giving Charles Radke another dangerous strike who's susceptible to being finished. I think that's the perfect step up for Jacoby Smith after that fight of Nico Price. Terrence McKinney, the guy who was afraid of making it past the first round. Now, I did matchmake Terrence McKinney last week, and I put him against Nicholas Mortar. This is a fight that I never really knew I wanted until last week. I was watching Nicholas Mortar not piece up, but obviously he had that that kind of combination against Nazim Sadikov when he was against the cage. And since watching that fight, I wanted to see him against Terrence McKinney. This would be absolute fire. Nicholas Mortar, super dangerous boxer, heavy-handed dude. Like I said, he had that exchange with Sadikov where he was backing up against the cage and nearly finished him. And he's overall just a dangerous dude. He's put Tom Nolan to sleep before. He does well against these tall, lanky guys in the lightweight division, and he hits very hard against Terrence McKinney, who might be the most vulnerable and yet the most dangerous dude at 155. His submission ability and his grappling has been on display recently. Also pretty dangerous on the feet. This is a fight that I'd love to see. Terrence McKinney, he's the definition of don't blink. Finishing guys in the first round or getting finished in the first round. Always bringing the action in your face off the get-go. And Nicholas Mortar, again, a lot of finishes in the UFC. He's also similar. He's been finished a few times. He's dished out a few finishes. These guys are exactly the same. Both very dangerous. Both very vulnerable. Both don't like to waste time and like to exchange as soon as possible. This would be a banger for 155. Guaranteed first round finish, just like every Terrence McKinney fight. So, Terrence McKinney, Nicholas Mortar, this is a fight that I'd love to see. And again, it makes sense considering that Nicholas Mortar just fought last week and McKinney fought this week. So maybe you do this fight later on in the year. I could see Nicholas Mortar chinning McKinney on the feet. I could see McKinney chinning Mortar or maybe getting a submission off. I don't know how this fight plays out, but one thing I will say, like I said before, doesn't make it past the first round. And I feel like this is what we should be doing for Terrence McKinney. He's not going to go on a title run. He's too vulnerable for that. You know, we got slipped by Rybovics last year. I feel like McKinney's a little bit too vulnerable, but these fights against other equally as dangerous guys, not cans, but guys who are also equally as dangerous, who could put his lights out, but also winnable for him, are the perfect fights for McKinney. So, him, Nicholas Mortar, that's the fight I want to see. And then for Tracy Cortez, beats Viviana Rougeau pretty dominantly. Her only loss in the UFC is now to Rose Namajunas. I think Tracy Cortez versus Macy Barber should be next. Yeah, Tracy Cortez has been on a bit of a run in the UFC. Her only loss is the main event to Rose Namajunas, and she has that really good win over Jasmine Judavicius, which I think has aged really well because Judavicius is in an absolute roll right now. I think the top 5 of the flyweight division is next for Tracy Cortez, and I think considering that Macy Barber's number 5, and even though she's coming off a few wins, she just was about to main event against Erin Blankfield, pulled out literally last second, so she's probably going to have to fight down now. And the punishment is fighting down the rankings, and I think Tracy Cortez Cortez is the perfect fight for Macy Barber. Macy Barber versus Tracy Cortez, two women who have been looking pretty good in the UFC with only a couple of losses. Well, I mean, Tracy Cortez only has one loss. Battling out for the top 5, and I think it's probably one of the more winnable fights for Tracy Cortez in the top 5. I would definitely lean towards Macy Barber winning this fight, but Cortez just dominated Araujo. She beat Jasmine Judavicius. She even looked good in that 5th round against Rose Namajunas. So Macy Barber versus Tracy Cortez, I think makes sense. Get Cortez somebody in the top 5. Macy Barber deserves to fight down after pulling out last minute against Erin Blanchfield. Get this fight done, and if Macy Barber doesn't show up, cut from the UFC, Cortez, Barber, get it done. And then for Jose Delgado, comes in on short notice, not on short notice, but comes into his UFC, his second fight in the UFC against 3-0 Hydra Mill. Big step up, and then just slumps him out cold. Decides that he doesn't want to waste no time. Slumps him out cold, folds him like a lawn chair ASAP. And in the post-fight Octagon interview, he specifically called for who did he call for? William Gomez at UFC No Share. And I said, fuck it. He called him out. Let's do the fight. Jose Delgado against William Gomez. Now, I will say, pretty respectable call out for Delgado, because I'd say he's deserved the fighter above William Gomez now. Gomez just got beaten by Hydra Mill. Delgado's just slept a Mill. It makes sense for Delgado to maybe fight even somebody in the top 15, but he called out William Gomez, and there's no need to rush him into the top 15 just yet when you've got a good prospect in your hands. I like this fight. William Gomez, pretty snappy kickboxer. He's got really good kickboxing, and that's what he's kind of known for. And obviously, Jose Delgado was just a KO machine. His Muay Thai is insane. He comes from a bunch of KOs on the regional scene, KO on the Contender Series, KO in his UFC debut, and just slept Hydra Mill. And I think for William Gomez, it's a winnable fight for Jose Delgado, especially after what he just did to Hydra Mill. And it's just experience for him before the top 15. I say you do this on UFC No Share, just like he said, get him in front of the Mexican fan base. Jose Delgado, William Gomez. It is a step up for Jose Delgado, in my opinion. I know William Gomez just got beaten by a Mill, but stylistically, it's quite a tough fight for Delgado because of the rangy kickboxing that Gomez has. And if you can beat William Gomez, like I said, it's got to be top 15 after that. You've beat Hydra Mill, you've beat William Gomez. There's not many other guys you can really beat. Jose Delgado getting in the top 15 after that would make sense, but he called out Gomez. I don't mind it. I'll let him get some experience before the top 15. I think it makes ultimate sense. Delgado, Gomez, get the fight done. UFC No Share makes ultimate sense. Gregory Rodriguez might be the most dangerous and scary upcoming guy we've got right now in the middleweight division. One of the most brutal finishes I've seen all year, as he absolutely slumps Jack Hermansson in the first round with a brutal uppercut, and then to put the cherry on top, gets the hammer fist as well. For Gregory Rodriguez, he's got to be straight back in the top 15. I know he got finished by Jared Cannonier, but he had success early on in that fight with Cannonier, and we're talking about him against the top 7 in the division. Getting back in the top 15, and I think a perfect fight for Rodriguez is the loser of Paulo Costa and Roman Kopylov. Paulo Costa and Roman Kopylov are going to be taking each other on, I think, at UFC 318, and if that's the case, then I want to see the loser of that fight down against Gregory Rodriguez. First of all, Kopylov versus Rodriguez is absolute heat. If Kopylov loses to Costa, him and Rodriguez might be one of the best fights we have in the middleweight division. You've got one of the most dangerous yet I feel like Roman Kopylov has the perfect mix of technique but danger at the same time. He's one of my favorite strikers at middleweight, and Roman Kopylov is just an absolute power machine with heavy hands. One of the most dangerous dudes coming up. So him and Kopylov would be an absolute banger for the middleweight division. And Paulo Costa, it depends on how active he is. If he takes another loss to Roman Kopylov, I'm not sure he'd be back ASAP and ready to fight within this year, because we know how long Costa takes between fights. But I think him again against Gregory Rodriguez could be fun. Costa's very dangerous, hard-hitting dude. Definitely a lot more inconsistent these days, and I feel like it's the perfect fight to build Rodriguez. And then after that, it's Rodriguez straight back in the top 15. You beat Costa or Kopylov, we're talking about somebody in the top 10 or at least the top 15 next for Gregory Rodriguez. I don't want to waste his time and feed him a can. Give him one of these guys. Him and Kopylov would be an absolute banger. Him and Costa would be a banger too. Loser of that fight at UFC 318 fights down against Gregory, and I think it's a good opportunity for Gregory to face another high-level guy, not too high in the rankings, but still gets him in the top 15, and I think stylistically whoever loses that fight would be fun for Gregory Rodriguez. Get him against the loser of Costa Kopylov later on this year. Perfect fight for Robocop. Felipe Lima in the main card loses to Peyton Talbot. I don't think his stock necessarily dropped. Maybe he's not the future contender that we thought he was. But I think for Felipe Lima, a good bounce-back fight could be Ricky Tercios. I think Ricky Tercios is a good bounce-back fight. Felipe Lima's 2-1 in the UFC. Tercios lost his last 2 fights to Sapai and Raul Rosas Jr. And Ricky Tercios is a weird fighter. He's very, very beatable. He's not high-level by any means, but he's also very wild. I think this would be a good, not test for Felipe Lima, because I definitely think he'd dominate this fight. But it'd be interesting to see how he handles Ricky Tercios, a guy who's crazy on the feet, always in your face, throwing crazy shit. It'd be quite a fun fight to see how Felipe deals with him, and I think it'd be a good bounce back for Felipe Lima. Again, we're not giving him an absolute monster. We're letting him kind of fight down in the I guess, unranked area of the bantamweight division against Ricky Tercios. Get another win, get back in the winning column and build yourself back up. But if Ricky Tercios could beat Felipe Lima, that's going to be massive for Ricky Tercios. And I will say, I don't want to see Tercios cut from the UFC just yet. Like I said, he might be very beatable, he might not be high level, but the guy's fun. He's a crazy fighter, throwing crazy shit all the time, looking to win the fight all opportunities. So him and Felipe Lima, I think, would be a good fight to kind of rebuild Felipe Lima, get that done. And then for Peyton Talbot, I think Jonathan Martinez versus Peyton Talbot would be a banger fight for Peyton Talbot next. It makes sense when you look at their record. Peyton Talbot's back in the winning column with his only loss being to Barcelos. Jonathan Martinez is on a 2-fight losing streak, and stylistically, it's another striker for Peyton Talbot. Peyton Talbot's got some of the most technical striking unranked at bantamweight, and we've been seeing him against grapplers recently. I want to see him in a pure striking match, but I think a guy like Jonathan Martinez, who's known for his kickboxing, with really good leg kicks, really good use of range, would be a perfect fight for Peyton Talbot, and I feel like it'd be the final hurdle before Peyton Talbot gets somebody in the top 15. He did call out Adrian Yanez. That would also be a banger fight, but I'd like to see Yanez against maybe Malcolm Wellmaker next. I think that's a perfect fight. But yeah, this just makes sense. It would be a step up in competition for Peyton Talbot, but it's against a pure striker, and the last time we saw him against a pure striker and Cameron Sammon, he beat the absolute dog shit out of him as well. So striker versus striker matchup. It's a step down for Jonathan Martinez away from the top 15. It's a step up for Peyton Talbot. Fun striking matchup, and if Talbot can go out there and look good against Jonathan Martinez and pull off a win, that's a statement-making win for Peyton Talbot. It's by far his biggest win in his UFC career so far against a tough guy, Martinez, and it's somebody in the top 15 after that for Peyton Talbot. So him and Jonathan Martinez is the perfect fight to make. I think you do this later on this year. Really good fight, fun striking matchup. It's a good way to kind of test how good Talbot is on the feet as well against another dangerous striker. Him, Martinez, get that fight done. And then for Renato Moicano, loses to Beneil Dariush in pretty dominant fashion. He's now on a 2-fight losing streak, and I think it's safe to say he's just simply not top 10 worthy. And he's going to have to fight down, probably against somebody unranked. And I feel the unranked guy for Moicano should be Fares Ziam. We've got to start giving Fares Ziam his flowers. He's one of the most disrespected dudes in the lightweight division. When is he going to get somebody in the top 15? You look at the top 15 of the lightweight division now. Moicano's on a 2-fight losing streak at number 11 in the division. He's going to have to fight down. And when is Fares Ziam going to get a fight in the top 15? This guy's on a 5-fight winning streak, including a dominant win over Matt Frivola, where he brutally KOs him and just out-grappled Mike Davis dominantly across 15 minutes, and they got the finish too. He's probably the best unranked lightweight on the roster right now, and I think it's criminal the fact that he's not got somebody in the top 15. And I think Moicano, stylistically, would be such an interesting matchup. For Ziam, he's got good grappling, just showed it against Mike Davis. How would that compare to a grappler in Moicano? How would the striking of Fares Ziam, who's never been a pretty good clinch striker with decent technique on the feet, be against a guy like Moicano, who's kind of improved his striking over time, but still not elite? I think it's the perfect fight. Fares Ziam goes out there and beats Moicano. We've got a new guy in the top 15. We've got a new, I guess, prospect coming up in the division. And it's another guy for, you know, the old dogs, what do you call them? Like the old guard of the division to potentially take on. And for Moicano, if he can pick up a win over Fares Ziam, it shows that he is still top 15 worthy. He's still able to hang in there with these younger guys. And he's back in the winning column. So Moicano versus Fares Ziam. Step down for Renato Moicano. Finally giving Fares Ziam somebody in the top 15. I would have done Yoel Alvarez versus Moicano, but there's been talks about Yoel Alvarez potentially moving up to a welterweight. So I think it's obviously, I don't really want to fuck with that. So Fares Ziam, Moicano, get that done. Then for Beneil Dariush, it's tough to matchmake Beneil Dariush because in the top 7, most guys are coming off wins, but I feel like Dan Hooker is probably the fight that makes the most sense. Like I said, if you look in the top 8 of the division, everybody ranked above Beneil Dariush, he's not going to fight anybody in the top 5. That's too big of a step up, and most of them are coming off wins, looking to fight for the belt. He's not going to fight Paddy. Paddy's coming off a win. He's not going to fight Gamrot. They've already fought before. So Dan Hooker's like the only real guy up in the rankings that Dariush could fight. Unless they give Dariush another one of these up-and-comers like a Yoel Alvarez, I think Dariush versus Hooker's kind of got to be the fight to make. They've called each other out before. It's a step up for Dariush. Not that Dan Hooker needs a step down, but the fact that he was just booked against Gaethje and he pulled out and he's been out for quite some time. I think having Dan Hooker in title contention right now, he's got to kind of earn his way back in. And again, they've both beaten Gamrot. Both of their best wins are both against Mateusz Gamrot. And I think the winner of this fight, especially Dan Hooker, who I would favour to win, get someone in the top 5. And like I said, I would favour Dan Hooker to win this fight. You know, at this stage, Dariush, even in that Moicano fight, I mean, he got dropped in the first round. He still does look a bit chinny. I think a good anti-grappler with heavy hands like Dan Hooker will probably be able to finish Dariush. And then therefore, we've got Dan Hooker back in contention. And for Dariush, if he can beat Dan Hooker, it's another really good win. Probably the best win of his career so far. And he's back on a winning streak. So Dariush versus Dan Hooker, a fight that I kind of want to see, a fight that I didn't really know that I wanted. It intrigues me, and I think it makes sense. sense for Dariush, but again, it's kind of hard to matchmake Dariush when most of the guys in the division above him are coming off wins or just doesn't really make sense to book him against. Brandon Royval just lost a very, very close fight of the year contender against Joshua Van. Got the win bonus in that fight as well. I assume he got a performance bonus as well for Brandon Royval. He's stocked despite losing. Has obviously rose after that fight, but there's been talks of Brandon Royval, if he loses this fight or just in general, moving up to the bantamweight division. So I think if we're going to do Brandon Royval at bantamweight, which I don't actually mind the idea of because he is quite big for lightweight, I think a perfect fight for Royval in his bantamweight debut, which I think makes sense because I don't think he wants to just stay as a top one gatekeeper for the flyweight division. Him versus Rob Font, I think makes ultimate sense. Brandon Royval versus Rob Font. This would be heat for Royval's debut in the bantamweight division. We've seen Rob Font take on Figueiredo when he moved up to bantamweight. I think him and Royval would be even better of a fight. Royval is one of the best strikers in this division. He fell short against Joshua Van, but still made it super competitive. One of the best boxers in this division. Rob Font, again, he might not be the elite of the elite, top 5 at bantamweight, but he's still got super crisp boxing. He's on a winning streak now. The last time we saw him against a prospect, he absolutely slept Adrian Yanez. Another fight of the year contender. I think this is a banger for Rob Font's debut in the bantamweight division. We give him a bit of a step down in the rankings, but against Rob Font, who's coming off a win. Royval versus Font, 2 boxers, 2 walk forward guys, 2 high output guys as well. I think for a debut in the bantamweight division, it doesn't really get much better than this for Royval. And if he can beat Rob Font, fuck it, give him somebody in the top 5. Give him like a PT Yan or some shit if he can beat Rob Font. And for Rob Font, if he can beat Royval, he's fighting somebody who was ranked above him in a different weight class, just like he did with Figge. And if he can beat Royval, you know, Rob Font's sort of more like a 3-fight winning streak now. So, Royval, Font for Royval's debut in the bantamweight division. And I'm going to matchmake Joshua Van, but I'm going to do that later on in the video because obviously I'll put him against Pantoja. So, Kai Kara France. I think the fight that makes sense next for Kai Kara France after he's just been submitted by Pantoja is probably going to be Manel Cap. I feel like now's the perfect time to make this fight. Manel Cap was supposed to take on Royval. He ended up pulling out of the fight, so he's obviously not going to be fighting a top contender, but he still deserves somebody in that top 5 of the division. And I feel like I feel like Cap and Kai Kara France has been one of those fights that we've been waiting for a while in the flyweight division. They've got one of the biggest rivalries, probably the biggest rivalry right now in this division. We were supposed to see it a few years ago at UFC 293. Kara France pulled out. Now that Manel Cap was scheduled to fight Royval and he pulled out, I think another top contender we can give him is Kara France coming off a loss. It's the perfect fight to make next. It makes ultimate sense. Kai Kara France versus Manel Cap. I think if Manel Cap can beat Kai Kara France, then he's probably earned his title opportunity because he just beat the guy who challenged for the belt and he's going to be on a big winning streak from there. And for Kara France, he gets to beat the guy who he's had a rivalry with for quite some time. And it's just an interesting fight in general because Manel Cap has looked amazing in his last 2 fights. Since that loss to Makayev, absolutely pieced up Bruno Silva and then goes out there and absolutely pieces up Azor Mabayev as well. And for Kai Kara France, he's still in that top 5 of the division. Maybe he can't really hang with the elite of the division, but I'm interested to see how he'd perform against Manel Cap, who I think would be a really tough stylistic matchup for Kara France. But again, neither of them have to worry about the grappling. It'd be a pure striking matchup. Manel Cap, who looks amazing. Kai Kara France, who hits hard. That's an interesting fight, and the rivalry just puts the cherry on top. France, Cap, get the fight done. For Pantoja, there's only one fight that makes sense, and it is Joshua Van. This is a fight that intrigues me massively. I've been waiting for a new contender to come in the flyweight division and take on Pantoja. It's just been the same guys at the top, but now that we've got Joshua Van, it makes ultimate sense. I don't need to say the fight. They had to face off in the octagon, and it's just one of the best fights you can do at flyweight right now. You've got Joshua Van, who's probably the best prospect turning into a contender in this division, who's just been smoking everybody on his huge winning streak. His stock has been rising recently against the greatest flyweight of this modern generation in Pantoja. You've got the best boxer in this division in Joshua Van with elite takedown defense. On paper, stylistically, a nightmare for Pantoja. Against Pantoja, who is absolutely crushing the division, beating everybody, lapping the division, making him look miles ahead of every other contender in this division. This is one of the best fights. I honestly wouldn't mind this as like a pay-per-view main event. Pantoja versus Van. I know flyweights get a lot of stick for being pay-per-view main events because of the star power, but this is that. Like, imagine like Kayla Harrison versus Nunes main event, co-main event Pantoja versus Van. That's a sick pay-per-view. Pantoja versus Van has to happen next. Van's earned his title shot, beat the #1 guy in Royval, and has kind of just been speedrunning his UFC career. 23 years old as well, against the greatest flyweight in this modern generation. I think this is stylistically the toughest fight for Pantoja in the division, but you can never count out Pantoja. There's a million reasons why this fight should be next. I shouldn't be having to tell you the fight. Pantoja, Van, get that fight done ASAP. And for Charles Oliveira, he's in a very tough spot now. He's approaching his 40s, and he's just been slumped out cold by Ilia Topuria, his 3rd loss in the past 2 years. He's going to be away from the title picture now, and that's not me saying he needs to fight super far down in the rankings. It's just I think the title talks for Oliveira now have to be at an end, at least for now. And I think the next fight against Oliveira should either be Max Holloway if he beats Dustin Poirier, or Mateus Gamrot. If Max Holloway beats Dustin Poirier, it should be Max Holloway versus Charles Oliveira next. If he can go out there against Dustin Poirier at UFC 318, beat Dustin Poirier, that's a massive win for Holloway, but he's not going to get a title shot from that, especially if Ilya is the champion. So I think he'd be about one fight away from a title fight. And I just think him and Oliveira at this stage would be such a fucking banger. Max Holloway, one of the best strikers in this division. The last time he was at this division, he absolutely pieced up Justin Gaethje and put the cherry on top with that knockout against one of the best submission artists in this division, Charles Oliveira. Next level grappling, showed improvements in his wrestling in the fight with Chandler. Oliver's got some of the best BJJ. I think this will be one of the best fights you can put on of the year. It's a step up for Max Holloway if he beats Poirier. It's a step down from Ilya to Poirier for Charles Oliveira. Two guys that have been selected by Poirier, but have been able to beat pretty much everyone else. Oliveira, Holloway, that makes ultimate sense as like a pay-per-view comment event if Holloway can beat Dustin Poirier. And if Holloway loses to Poirier, Poirier's going to retire. So I think Oliveira versus Gamrot could make sense as well. I think this would be a fun fight stylistically because it's another wrestler that we're seeing against Oliveira. Not as dangerous as Makhachev, doesn't have the submission ability and doesn't have the striking threat on the feet like a guy like, obviously, Makhachev. But it's still a step down and still a test for Oliveira. Gamrot's coming off a win over Ludovic Klein. He's going to want to fight up in the rankings. And I feel like Oliveira versus Gamrot has kind of been like a fantasy fight for quite a long time in the lightweight division. So Oliveira, I want to see him against either Holloway if he can beat Dustin Poirier or Mateusz Gamrot if not. Either one of those guys I'm happy with for Oliveira. A step away from the title picture, but still two intriguing fights for Oliveira. And then for Ilya to Poirier, there's three guys that make sense next at 155. It's Tsarukyan, Gaethje, and Paddy Pimblett. It better not be Gaethje next. I know he's in the contendership, but he's still a fight away from a title fight. They better not do Justin Gaethje versus Ilya to Poirier next. The most deserving is Arman Tsarukyan. He's on this big winning streak. Arman Tsarukyan's by far the most deserving, but Dana White's already said that he's not going to be getting the next fight. Even in the post-fight Octagon interview, he said he's not going to be getting the next title fight. He said after UFC 311, which means it's probably going to be Topuria versus Paddy Pimblett. And you know what? Call it undeserving. I know you might think I've got double standards with how I've been thinking about this whole Yair Rodriguez situation at featherweight, but this fight intrigues me a lot, and I feel like it's an opportunity of a lifetime. This has, since 2022, been one of the biggest rivalries in the UFC, but I don't think anybody ever expected them to settle their beef at lightweight for the belt in this division when they were both unranked, when they were both on the come-up. It's an opportunity of the lifetime. The face-off that they both had in the Octagon, it would sell a shit ton of pay-per-views in Spain. It's an opportunity of a lifetime to make this fight. It's always been one of those what-if fights. Now, there's never been a better time to make the fight than now. Paddy Pimblett versus Ilya Topuria for the lightweight belt. I know Paddy Pimblett's still probably got one more fight left, but I'd rather this than Gaethje. Tsarukyan's more deserving, but Dana's already said he's not getting the next shot. Paddy versus Topuria would be an absolute super fight for the lightweight division. Now, don't get me wrong. Is it on the same level as an Oliveira, Volkanovski, and Holloway in terms of opponent quality for Topuria? No, it's not. The chances of him going out there and slumping Paddy Pimblett out cold in the very first round is very, very high. But still, the build-up that they'd have, the rivalry that we can capitalize on, the opportunity that we've got to make this fight now more than ever when they've both been doing nothing but winning since their altercation. Topuria versus Paddy Pimblett for the lightweight belt makes ultimate sense. Maybe the winner can take on Arman Tsarukyan and Gaethje takes on another contender, I'm not sure, but it's a massive fight. Topuria, Paddy Pimblett in Spain. It would sell a shit ton of pay-per-views. It's a super fight, and I think it makes sense, especially after the face-off that they had in the Octagon. Imagine Paddy Pimblett was the guy to beat Topuria. Volkanovski couldn't do it. Holloway couldn't do it. Oliveira couldn't do it. Nobody's been able to do it. Imagine Paddy Pimblett, who bloats up between fights and becomes all beast looking like Chris Griffin, who, you know, arguably got beat by Jared Gordon 2 years ago, as the guy to beat Ilya Topuria. That would be a massive turn of events, but Topuria Pimblett, I don't mind this fight next. I know Tsarukyan's the most deserving, and if Tsarukyan wants to get the next title fight, there's not a bone in my body that would be complaining, but for how big this fight would be, Topuria, Pimblett, fuck it, get the fight done in Spain. I think it'll be a super fight. But those are the fights I'd make after UFC 317. A bunch of good fights to make, really good card. Let me know your thoughts and if you agree or disagree with these fights. And yeah, thank you for watching.